I didn't know Easter brunch would be the moment my marriage officially ended. The table was full. My parents, his parents, people who had watched our relationship grow from the beginning, plates of food half finished, coffee cooling in mugs, laughter still hanging in the air from a conversation that had nothing to do with what was about to happen. Then my husband put his fork down. "I think I should tell you now," he said, his voice steady in a way that felt rehearsed. "I've been seeing someone you know." The room went completely silent. Not awkward silence, not confused silence. The kind of silence where every breath sounds too loud, where you can feel everyone's eyes darting back and forth, waiting for a reaction. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even ask who. I looked at him and said calmly, "All right. Thank you for being honest today." For a split second, I saw it in his eyes. He hadn't expected that. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that I already knew exactly who it was. And I hadn't come to Easter brunch unprepared. When I reached down beside my chair and lifted the black folder I had brought with me, his expression changed instantly. Confidence drained from his face. His jaw tightened. His hands froze on the table. Fear replaced control. I'm 35 years old, and 2 months before that brunch, I learned something most people never understand until it's too late. Sometimes the strongest response to betrayal isn't anger. It isn't confrontation. It isn't screaming or walking out. It's patience. It's preparation. It's letting the truth surface at the exact moment it can no longer be twisted, denied, or explained away. My husband and I had been together for 10 years, married for 7. We met in graduate school, built our careers side by side, bought a house, raised a dog, and created a life that looked solid from the outside. People envied us. They had no idea that while I was planning long-term finances and a future I believed in, the man sitting across from me had been sleeping with someone who had eaten at our table, laughed in our living room, and called himself his friend. I didn't explode when I found out. I didn't accuse him. I didn't let him know I was aware. Instead, I gathered evidence. Every lie, every meeting, every message. And on Easter Sunday, surrounded by everyone who mattered, I let him finish his confession. Then I opened the folder, and I watched his world begin to fall apart. Because betrayal feels powerful, right up until the moment it's exposed. I was 25 when I met my husband, and at the time, my life revolved around deadlines, ambition, and the quiet panic of trying to become someone successful before the world decided I was falling behind. We met in graduate school. Both of us were working toward our MBAs. Both of us surviving on caffeine, spreadsheets, and late nights in study rooms that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and dry erase markers. We didn't meet in a dramatic way. No sparks across a crowded room. No instant obsession. We bonded slowly, organically, over exhaustion. Late-night study sessions turned into shared dinners. Group projects turned into long conversations about goals, values, and the kind of life we wanted once the chaos ended. He was calm where I was intense, strategic where I was emotional. He made me feel grounded in a way that felt safe, reliable, adult. That mattered to me. After graduation, our paths seemed perfectly aligned. He went into corporate consulting, climbing quickly, thriving in environments that rewarded confidence and presentation. I built my career in financial planning, drawn to structure, long-term thinking, and the quiet satisfaction of helping people prepare for their futures. We dated for 3 years before we got married. By then, everyone expected it. Our families loved us together. Friends called us the stable ones. When he proposed, it wasn't flashy, just the two of us. A quiet weekend away, a ring he'd clearly spent time choosing. I said yes without hesitation. Marriage felt like a continuation, not a transformation. We bought a house in the suburbs, the kind with a yard big enough for a dog and a future that felt predictable in the best way. 2 cars in the driveway, weekend routines, shared calendars, a golden retriever named Bailey who became the center of our world. From the outside, we looked unshakable. And for years, I believed we were. The early years of our marriage were steady. Not thrilling, not dramatic, but solid. We supported each other's careers, showed up for family events, hosted dinners, planned holidays months in advance. We talked about growing old together like it was a given, not a question. If there were small warning signs back then, I didn't recognize them as such. He liked admiration, not overtly, not in a way that felt dangerous, but he enjoyed being appreciated, being seen as impressive. I chalked it up to confidence, to the culture of his work. He also talked about his past more than I expected, not bitterly, but nostalgically. Stories about college, about old friendships, about people who had understood him differently. I didn't feel threatened. I trusted him completely. That trust is what makes betrayal so devastating. Not because you didn't see it coming, but because you never believed you needed to look. And when things finally began to shift months later, I didn't recognize the change as danger. I thought it was stress. I thought it was career pressure. I thought it was just another phase of adulthood. I had no idea how quietly my marriage was already slipping out from under me. The first signs didn't announce themselves as betrayal. They arrived disguised as progress. My husband started coming home later than usual. At first, it made sense. Consulting meant unpredictable hours, client dinners, last-minute meetings. I'd lived alongside that reality for years without questioning it. When he said a meeting ran long, I believed him. When he said he needed to step out for a call, I didn't ask who it was. But gradually, the rhythm changed. He became glued to his phone in a way he hadn't been before, not casually scrolling, but actively engaged, smiling at the screen, tilting it slightly away when I walked into the room, locking it quickly, as if by reflex. When I asked something simple like, "Everything okay?" he'd answer too fast. "Yeah, just work." I wanted to believe that. Then came the lifestyle shifts. He started going to the gym more frequently, sometimes twice a day, bought new clothes that felt sharper, more deliberate, changed his cologne to something unfamiliar. Again, none of it was damning on its own. People evolve. People care about how they look. I told myself I was reading into things because I was tired or stressed. But patterns don't need to be loud to be dangerous. He began volunteering for errands he used to avoid. Grocery runs, late-night drives, quick trips out, just to clear his head. He'd come home and head straight for the shower, claiming the gym had been especially intense. Steam would fill the bathroom while I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that nothing was wrong. The real shift, though, was emotional. He became distant in small, cutting ways, less present during conversations, less curious about my day. When we sat together, his body language angled slightly away, as if his attention was split between me and somewhere else. I started feeling like I was interrupting something whenever I spoke. Friends noticed before I did. At a dinner party, one of our close friends joked, "You two seem busy lately. Barely see you together anymore." My husband laughed it off. I forced a smile. Inside, something tightened. The first moment that truly unsettled me came on a random Tuesday night, about 3 months before Easter. A meeting I had scheduled got canceled unexpectedly, so I came home early. The house was quiet. The lights in the backyard were on. I stepped onto the patio just in time to hear his voice through the glass door. Low, intimate, soft in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in months. "I know," he was saying. "I miss you too. He's working late tonight. We could meet around 8. My heart stopped. He turned and saw me standing there, his face drained of color. Panic flashed across his eyes before he masked it. He ended the call quickly, too quickly. "Okay, Mom," he said loudly, forcing a cheerful tone. "Talk to you later." He came inside like nothing had happened. "Your mom?" I asked. "Yeah," he said without hesitation. "She's been going through some stuff. You know how she gets." I nodded. But something inside me shifted permanently. His mother lived in Florida. They talked maybe once a month. And never like that. Never in hushed tones on the back patio. Never with that kind of emotional weight. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I started paying attention. And once I did, I couldn't stop seeing it. After that night on the patio, I couldn't unhear his voice. The tone, the softness, the familiarity that had nothing to do with family. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I'd built a decade-long relationship on trust, not paranoia. But once doubt enters a marriage, it doesn't announce itself loudly. It sits quietly and waits for evidence. And evidence came quickly. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed everything. The way he angled his phone away from me when he texted. The way notifications disappeared seconds after lighting up the screen. The way he volunteered for errands late at night, trips that used to annoy him but now felt convenient. He started coming home smelling freshly showered, even on days he claimed he hadn't been to the gym. His explanations came too smoothly, like lines he'd rehearsed. I wasn't looking for proof yet. I was looking for clarity. One evening, while folding laundry, I asked casually, "How's your mom doing?" He didn't look up. "Better." "When did you talk to her last?" There was a pause, barely noticeable, but it was there. "Couple days ago," he said. That was the moment I knew. Because he used to tell me everything about his parents, complaints, updates, small worries. Now he was vague in a way that felt intentional. Still, I didn't confront him. Instead, I made a decision that went against everything I believed about myself. I hired a private investigator. It felt surreal making that call. I remember sitting in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding as I explained the situation to a stranger. 2 weeks of surveillance, $2,500. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but part of me already knew I wasn't. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I played the role of oblivious wife perfectly. I smiled, I nodded, I asked about his day, I kissed him goodnight, all while documenting dates, times, excuses, and inconsistencies in a notes app I protected with a password he didn't know. When the PI called me to come in for the report, I felt numb. The folder he handed me was thick. Photos, timestamps, location data, hotel entrances, restaurant patios in the next town over, my own driveway on days he thought I'd be at work all afternoon. And the name at the top of the report made my vision blur. Trevor, my former college roommate, my husband's closest friend, the man who stood beside him as best man at our wedding. The report documented 23 separate meetings, hotel rooms charged to his credit card, lunch dates where they held hands across the table, text message excerpts the investigator had been able to retrieve, explicit planning, emotional intimacy, inside jokes that made my stomach turn. They had been sleeping together for at least 5 months, probably longer. I sat in my car in this parking lot for nearly an hour, staring at the pages in my lap, trying to reconcile the life I thought I had with the reality printed in black ink. And then something unexpected happened. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't call my husband. I closed the folder, and I started planning. Because if he was capable of betraying me this deeply, then I needed to protect myself just as thoroughly. That was the night my marriage stopped being emotional and became strategic. I drove home that night with the folder on the passenger seat like it was something fragile. Not because the evidence might disappear, but because once I opened it again at home, there would be no pretending left. When I walked through the door, my husband was in the kitchen, humming softly as he poured himself a drink. He smiled at me like nothing in the world was wrong. "How was your day?" he asked. "Long," I said, and for the first time, it wasn't a lie that needed explaining. That night, I lay awake next to him, listening to his breathing, feeling the familiar weight of his arm draped casually across my waist. I stared at the ceiling and realized something terrifyingly calm inside me. The man beside me was now a stranger. Shock didn't come all at once. It arrived in waves. First, disbelief. Then grief. Not for him, but for the version of my life I'd believed in. Then anger, sharp and precise, but contained. I didn't confront him. Not because I was afraid, because I was done reacting blindly. The next morning, after he left for work, I made coffee and spread the contents of the PI's report across the dining table. I read everything slowly, methodically, dates, times, patterns. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with, not just emotionally, but practically. That same day, I called a lawyer. I didn't cry on the phone. I didn't vent. I explained the situation calmly and sent over the evidence. He reviewed it and told me something that shifted everything. "You have leverage," he said, "but only if you stay quiet and prepare." So I did. Over the next several weeks, I became someone my husband didn't recognize, not because I changed outwardly, but because I stopped being careless with my trust. I quietly documented all our assets, copied account statements, listed property details, moved money into accounts he didn't have access to, not to steal, but to protect myself. I made backups of everything. Cloud storage, physical copies, USB drives, hidden in places he'd never think to look. I wasn't being dramatic, I was being thorough. At home, I played my role perfectly. I laughed at his jokes, asked about his meetings, listened to his excuses. Every lie he told, I logged. Every late night, every work dinner, every fake errand. It was exhausting, but clarity is often earned through discomfort. The hardest part wasn't pretending. It was watching how easily he moved between worlds, how effortlessly he lied to my face, then turned around and slept beside me as if nothing had changed. But what hurt most wasn't the sex. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the audacity. The way he brought Trevor into our home. The way he invited him to dinner. The way he let him smile at me across the table while sleeping with my husband behind my back. That's when I knew something else. This wasn't going to be a private conversation. He had already made it public the moment he involved our families, our friends, and our shared life. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. And he handed it to me himself when he suggested hosting Easter brunch. When my husband suggested hosting Easter brunch, I almost laughed. "Let's do it at our place, Gamais," he said one evening, scrolling through his phone. "Your parents, my parents, maybe Trevor, and a couple of friends. It would be nice to have everyone together." The audacity of it hit me like a cold wave. Inviting the man he'd been sleeping with into our home, again, this time surrounded by family, faith, and tradition. But I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask questions. "Sure," I said lightly. "That sounds great." Something in his expression softened, as if he felt relieved, as if my agreement meant safety, permission, silence mistaken for ignorance. From that moment on, everything accelerated. I finalized my preparations. I met with my lawyer again and reviewed every detail: what to say, what not to say, when to present evidence, how to protect myself financially and legally. Divorce papers were drafted and filed quietly. All that was missing was his signature. I organized the evidence into a black leather portfolio: chronological tabs, highlighted timestamps, printed photos, hotel receipts, message transcripts, not to humiliate, but to make denial impossible. At home, my husband grew more careless. He texted openly when he thought I wasn't looking, took longer showers, made excuses that contradicted themselves. He assumed he was safe because I was calm. What he didn't understand was that calm isn't always forgiveness. Sometimes it's focus. Easter morning arrived warm and bright. I woke up early, long before he did. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that exists before a storm. I did one final check of everything: the folder in my briefcase, the envelope sealed and ready, the backup secured. People started arriving late morning. My parents first, smiling, carrying pastries. His parents next, warm and familiar. Friends followed. Laughter filled the house. Plates clinked. Coffee brewed. Trevor arrived last. He brought a bottle of wine and greeted my husband with an easy smile, shook my hand like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't been sleeping with my husband for months. I smiled back. We sat down to eat around noon. Ham, deviled eggs, roasted vegetables. The kind of meal meant to symbolize renewal and unity. I watched my husband play host, charming, relaxed, completely at ease. I wondered briefly if he felt any guilt at all. Dessert came: lemon meringue pie, coffee. The table settled into that comfortable post-meal lull. That's when he put his fork down. "I have something I need to say," he announced. The room went quiet. "I think I should tell you now," he continued, voice steady. "I've been seeing someone you know." Silence fell hard. I set my coffee cup down gently. "All right," I said. "Thank you for being honest today." He looked at me, surprised, confused. That wasn't the reaction he'd expected. That was when I reached down and lifted the black folder from beside my chair. "Since we're being honest," I said calmly, opening it, "let me share some honesty too." And in that moment, as I placed the first photograph in the center of the table, I watched the confidence drain from his face. The stage was set, and the truth was finally ready to walk into the light. The photograph lay in the center of the table like a dropped plate. No one spoke at first. It showed my husband and Trevor walking into a hotel together, his hand resting casually at Trevor's lower back, timestamp printed clearly at the bottom. Valentine's Day. While I thought my husband was at a work conference 3 states away. My husband stared at it, frozen. Trevor's face drained of color. His chair scraped softly against the floor as he shifted, suddenly unsure where to put his hands. "February 14th, I said calmly, my voice steady in a way that didn't feel human to me anymore. "Marriott downtown, room 412. You told me you were presenting to a client panel." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. His father leaned forward, squinting, as if looking harder might change what he was seeing. My husband opened his mouth, closed it. I pulled out another page. "March 3rd, I continued. Lunch at Marcello's in Riverside. You told me you were meeting a college friend." I glanced at Trevor. "You called in sick to work that day." Trevor pushed his chair back further now, legs trembling. No one looked at him. No one defended him. Then I laid out the third item, but didn't turn it fully toward the table. "March 18th, I said quietly. Our house. A day I was supposed to be in meetings all afternoon. The investigator got some interesting shots through our bedroom window. I didn't need to show them. The implication was enough. My husband's father stood up so abruptly his chair tipped backward. "Get out," he said to Trevor, his voice shaking with rage I'd never heard before. "Get out of my son's house." Trevor didn't argue. He mumbled something that sounded like an apology and rushed for the door. We heard his car start seconds later. The room felt smaller once he was gone. My husband was crying now, not quietly, not with dignity. His shoulders shook as he buried his face in his hands. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice cracking. "About 10 weeks," I replied. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I needed proof," I said. "And I needed time." I slid the sealed envelope across the table toward him. And because I needed to prepare. He opened it with shaking fingers. "Divorce papers. Filed 3 weeks ago." "These just need your signature," I continued evenly. "My lawyer says if you contest this, all of this," I tapped the folder, "goes into public record. If you sign, we can keep it quiet." His mother started crying then. His father looked at him with something like disgust. My own mother came around the table and placed a hand on my shoulder. It grounded me in a way nothing else had. "I think everyone should go," I said softly. "My husband and I need to discuss logistics." No one argued. Within 10 minutes, the house emptied. My parents offered to stay. I shook my head. His parents left without saying goodbye to him. When the door finally closed, the silence was crushing. My husband collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I don't know what I was thinking. It just happened, and then it kept happening, and I didn't know how to stop." "You stop by stopping," I said. "You stop by remembering you're married." "I'm a terrible person." "You're not terrible," I said. "You're someone who made choices. Now you live with the consequences." "Do we really have to get divorced?" he asked desperately. "Can we try therapy?" I looked at him for a long moment. "You slept with my best friend for 5 months," I said. "You lied to me every day. You brought him into our home. You invited him to Easter brunch while planning to confess in front of our families." I shook my head slowly. "There is no therapy that fixes that." That was the lowest moment, not because I was losing my marriage, but because I realized I'd already lost it long before that day. And somehow, standing there in the wreckage, I felt clear. After everyone left, the house felt unnaturally quiet, not peaceful, hollow, the kind of quiet that presses in on you, making every sound feel too sharp, too loud. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, my own breathing. My husband sat across from me at the dining table, eyes red, shoulders slumped, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. Not powerful, not confident, just exposed. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a slow breath. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, not the confrontation, not the exposure, but this. The moment where I had to decide who I was going to be on the other side of the truth. "Now," I said, "you sign the papers." He flinched. "It doesn't have to be like this. We can slow down. Take time. Go to counseling. I'll cut Trevor out of my life completely." I shook my head. "This isn't about Trevor anymore." He looked confused. "This is about trust," I continued. "And trust isn't something you rebuild after months of lying, after sleeping with my closest friend, after turning our home into a place where I was being betrayed without my knowledge." "I was scared," he said quickly. "I didn't want to lose you." "You lost me the moment you chose to protect the affair instead of the marriage," I replied. That was the turning point, not just for him, but for me. Because for the first time since I'd discovered the truth, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't defending. I wasn't explaining myself. I was stating facts. I pulled out the documents I'd prepared. Asset lists, account summaries, notes from my lawyer. Everything organized, clear, impossible to dispute. "The house is in both our names," I said. "You can buy out my half, or we sell it and split the proceeds. 50-50. I've already documented everything." His eyes flicked to the papers. "You moved money." "I protected myself," I said calmly. "I wasn't going to leave our finances exposed while you were lying to me. That's not revenge. That's survival." He stared at me like he was seeing a version of me he'd never met before. "You planned all of this," he said. "Yes," I answered, "because when I commit to something, I do it honestly." He swallowed hard, then reached for the pen. Watching him sign the papers was strange. I expected triumph, or anger, or grief. What I felt instead was relief. Not because I'd won, but because the waiting was over. The pretending was over. The uncertainty was gone. When he finished signing, he slid the papers back toward me. "I never thought you'd be capable of this," he said quietly. I met his gaze. "Neither did I. But you didn't leave me much choice." That was the moment I fully stepped out of the marriage, not as someone abandoned or betrayed, but as someone who had chosen herself deliberately. And once that choice was made, there was no going back. The days after Easter passed in a blur of logistics. My husband moved out within a week. At first, he stayed with his parents. Then, quietly, he found an apartment closer to his office. The house felt different without him. Not emptier, just lighter. Like the walls themselves were relieved to stop holding secrets. We sold the house faster than I expected. The market was good. The timing, ironically, perfect. We split the proceeds evenly, exactly as outlined. No arguing, no bargaining. He didn't fight me on a single thing. Except Bailey, our golden retriever. He tried to keep her, claiming it would be easier for him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I simply showed the documentation. Vet bills in my name, training receipts, boarding records, photos of me taking her to appointments when he was working late. He didn't argue after that. Bailey came home with me. That small victory mattered more than the house, more than the money. She was the last piece of the life I hadn't lost. Trevor tried to contact me once. A long message, apologetic, self-pitying, full of phrases like, "I never meant for this to happen," and "it just got out of control." I didn't respond. I blocked his number. Later, I heard through mutual friends that his girlfriend, yes, the one he'd been cheating on as well, left him as soon as the truth came out. Apparently, she had no idea either. The affair didn't survive daylight. It burned out quickly once secrecy was gone. My husband and Trevor weren't together either. Whatever fantasy they'd built collapsed the moment it required accountability. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. I felt distance. My parents became my anchor during those weeks. My father took me fishing one afternoon, something we hadn't done since I was a teenager. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. My mother called every Sunday, not to give advice, just to ask how I was breathing that day. They admitted something quietly, carefully. "We never liked how comfortable he was lying," my mother said once. "We just didn't think it was our place." I didn't blame them. I started therapy a month later, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to make sure I didn't carry the betrayal into the rest of my life like a shadow. My therapist said something that stayed with me. "You didn't just lose a marriage," she said. "You lost a future you believed in. Those are two different griefs." She was right. I didn't miss him. I missed the version of my life that never really existed. And slowly, day by day, that grief softened into clarity. 6 weeks after Easter, the divorce was finalized. No court battles, no dramatic last-minute pleas, just signatures, paperwork, and the quiet closing of a chapter I once believed would last a lifetime. I moved into a smaller place, a townhouse about 20 minutes from where the old house was. It wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. Less space to clean, fewer rooms filled with memories I didn't want to revisit. Bailey adjusted quickly, curling up beside me every night like she understood that something had shifted and this was our new normal. The hardest part wasn't missing my husband. It was mourning the future I thought we were building, the trips we talked about taking, the traditions we planned to start, the belief that loyalty was a given, not something that had to be proven. Once I allowed myself to grieve that, not him, but the illusion, I began to feel lighter. I started therapy, not because I felt weak, but because I wanted to stay honest with myself. My therapist told me something that reframed everything. "You didn't react emotionally," she said. "You responded strategically. That doesn't mean you didn't hurt. It means you trusted yourself." That mattered. I've been dating casually since then. Nothing serious, no rush. I'm taking time to understand who I am outside of that marriage, outside of being someone's wife, someone's safety net, someone who believed commitment meant endurance. What I know now is this: love without honesty is just performance. Commitment without integrity is just habit. The betrayal didn't begin when my husband slept with my friend. It began the moment he chose secrecy over transparency, convenience over courage. People have asked why I confronted him publicly instead of privately. The answer is simple. He chose the moment. He chose the setting. He chose to confess in front of our families. I just chose to come prepared. And that preparation saved me months, maybe years, of manipulation, denial, and self-doubt. If there's one lesson I'd leave with anyone listening, it's this. If someone shows you a pattern, believe it. If something feels off, don't silence yourself to keep the peace. And if you ever find yourself being loyal to someone who isn't being honest with you, loyalty to yourself must come first. I didn't win anything by exposing the truth, but I did get my life back. And that was worth every moment of waiting.